My name is Jake Morrison, and I've been ranching in the high desert of New Mexico for 37 years. I've seen drought and flood, prosperity and ruin, life and death on this unforgiving land, but nothing in all those years prepared me for it. What I discovered in the summer of 2019, or for the extraordinary events that followed. The Morrison Ranch sits on 12,000 acres of rugged terrain, about 40 miles northeast of Santa Fe. It's been in my family for 4 generations. Passed down from my great-grandfather who homesteaded here in 1887. The land is harsh and beautiful red rock mesas, deep arroyos, scattered juniper and pinyon pine, an endless sky that stretches from horizon to horizon. Most folks would call it a hard place to make a living, and they'd be right. The rainfall is unpredictable, the growing season is short, and the nearest neighbor is 15 miles away. But this land gets into your blood. Once you've watched the sunrise paint the mesa walls gold and crimson, once you've felt the profound silence of the desert night, you understand why my family has fought to keep this place for over a century. I run about 800 head of cattle, mostly Angus and Hereford crosses that can handle the altitude and the climate. It's not easy work, especially doing it mostly alone, since my wife Sarah passed 5 years ago. My 2 sons moved to Denver and Albuquerque years ago, chasing careers that don't involve getting up at 4 in the morning to check on pregnant cows. In a snowstorm, the discovery that changed everything happened on a Tuesday morning in late June. I was riding my horse, Buck, through an area we call Devil's Canyon, looking for strays that might have wandered off during the night. Devil's Canyon is a deep, narrow gorge that cuts through the northeastern section of the ranch, with steep walls of red sandstone and a seasonal creek that runs through the bottom. It's not a place I go often. The terrain is treacherous, the access is difficult, and there's not much good grazing down there. But we'd had some unusual thunderstorms the week before, and I wanted to check if the flash flooding had damaged any of the fencing or created new hazards. As Buck and I picked our way down the narrow trail into the canyon, I noticed something that made me pull up short. About halfway down the canyon wall, on a natural ledge that I'd ridden past hundreds of times before, there was something that didn't belong. The recent storms had washed away decades of accumulated dirt and debris, revealing what looked like a circular arrangement of stones. From my position on the trail, I could see that the stones were clearly placed by human hands. They were too regular, too purposeful to be natural. I tied Buck to a sturdy juniper and made my way across the steep slope to get a closer look. What I found took my breath away. It was an altar. There was no other word for it. Someone, long ago, had carefully arranged flat sandstone slabs in a perfect circle, about 8 feet across. In the center was a raised platform made of fitted stones, and around the perimeter were smaller stones that had clearly been shaped and positioned with great care. But time and weather had taken their toll. Many of the stones had fallen or been displaced, debris had filled the spaces between them, and the entire structure was partially buried under decades of accumulated soil and vegetation. It was like finding the ruins of an ancient temple hidden in my own backyard. I'm not an archaeologist, but I've lived in New Mexico long enough to recognize Native American stonework when I see it. The craftsmanship was extraordinary. The stones fit together with precision that spoke of great skill and patience. This wasn't some casual arrangement. This was a sacred place, built with reverence and intention. As I knelt among the scattered stones, trying to understand what I was looking at, I felt something I'd never experienced before. It was as if the very air around the altar was differentiated, with an energy that made the hair on my arms stand up. The silence seemed deeper, more profound. Even the wind seemed too quiet as it passed through this place. I spent the better part of 2 hours examining the site, trying to piece together how it might have originally looked. Some of the stones were massive, too heavy for one person to move alone. Others were smaller, carved with symbols that I didn't recognize, but that clearly had meaning to whoever had created them. The more I studied the altar, the more convinced I became that this was something special. This wasn't just an archaeological curiosity, it was a sacred site that had been forgotten and abandoned, left to crumble while the world moved on around it. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd found. I did some research online and learned that the area around my ranch had been inhabited by various Native American tribes for thousands of years. The Pueblo peoples, the Apache, the Navajo, had lived and hunted in this region. It was entirely possible that the altar I'd discovered was centuries old, maybe even older. But what bothered me most was the condition of the site. Here was something that had clearly been important to someone, something that had been built with care and reverence, and it was falling apart. The storms that had revealed it had also damaged it further. If nothing was done, it would continue to deteriorate until nothing remained but scattered stones. I'm not a religious man in the conventional sense. I don't attend church regularly, and I've never been one for formal ceremonies or rituals. But I do believe in respecting the land and honoring those who came before us. This altar represented something sacred to people who had lived on this land long before my family arrived. It seemed wrong to just let it crumble away. Over the next few days, I found myself returning to Devil's Canyon again and again. Each time, I spent hours studying the altar, trying to understand its original configuration. I took photographs from every angle, made sketches, and even did some careful measurements. Gradually, a plan began to form in my mind. I could restore it. I had the skills 40 years of ranch work had taught me how to move heavy stones and build structures that could withstand the elements. I had the time. Summer is the slow season on a cattle ranch, when the main work is just keeping an eye on the herd and maintaining equipment. But most importantly, I felt called to do it. There's no other way to describe the feeling that grew stronger each time I visited the site. It was as if the altar itself was asking to be restored, as if the spirits of those who had built it were whispering in the wind, asking me to honor their work. The decision wasn't made lightly. I knew that disturbing an archaeological site could be controversial, maybe even illegal. I considered contacting the state archaeologist or the local tribal authorities, but I also knew that bureaucracy moves slowly, and by the time any official action was taken, the next storm season might wash away what little remained of the altar. In the end, I decided to trust my instincts. I would restore the altar as carefully and respectfully as possible, using only the original stones and following what I believed to be the original design. I wouldn't add anything new or change anything fundamental. I would simply put back together what time and weather had torn apart. The work began on a Monday morning in early July. I loaded my truck with tools, pry bars, shovels, a small winch, and rope, and drove out to Devil's Canyon. Buck followed along, curious about this new routine that had taken us away from our usual ranch work. The first task was clearing away the debris that had accumulated around and within the altar. Decades of wind-blown soil, fallen leaves, and small rocks had to be carefully removed. I worked slowly, treating each stone like a piece of precious pottery that might shatter if handled roughly. As I cleared away the debris, the original design of the altar became clearer. The outer circle was made of upright stones, each about 3 feet tall and carefully shaped to fit together. Inside this circle was a second ring of smaller stones, and at the center was the raised platform I had noticed on my first visit, but there were also details I hadn't seen before. Some of the stones bore carved symbol spirals, zigzag lines, and shapes that might have been animals or celestial objects. Others had been shaped into specific forms that clearly had meaning, though I couldn't begin to guess what that meaning might be. The work was physically demanding. Some of the fallen stones weighed several hundred pounds, and moving them back into position required careful planning and the use of levers and ropes. But it was also deeply satisfying. With each stone I repositioned, the altar came closer to its original form. As I worked, I began to feel a connection to the people who had originally built this place. I imagined them working together, planning the design, quarrying the stones, and carefully fitting each piece into place. I wondered what ceremonies had been performed here, what prayers had been offered, what hopes and fears had been brought to this sacred space. The work took 6 days. Each morning, I would arrive at Devil's Canyon with the sunrise and work until the heat of the afternoon made it unbearable. Each evening, I would return home exhausted but strangely energized, eager to continue the work the next day. On the 6th day, I placed the final stone, a large, flat slab that formed the top of the central platform. As I stepped back to survey the completed altar, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment mixed with something deeper. The structure was beautiful in its simplicity and power. It seemed to belong to the landscape as naturally as the canyon walls themselves. But more than that, it felt alive. The same energy I had sensed on my first visit was stronger now, as if the act of restoration had awakened something that had been sleeping. The air around the altar seemed to shimmer with an invisible presence, and the silence was so complete it felt like the entire canyon was holding its breath. That evening, As I drove home in the gathering dusk, I felt a deep satisfaction. I had honored the work of those who came before me. I had preserved something sacred that might otherwise have been lost forever. Whatever happened next, I had done the right thing. What I didn't know was that my work had been observed. High on the canyon rim, invisible to me as I labored below, eyes had been watching. Word was already spreading through channels I knew nothing about, carried by voices that spoke in languages I didn't understand. The altar was complete, but the story was just beginning. 3 days after I completed the restoration of the altar, I began to notice signs that I was being watched. It started with small things, tracks around the ranch buildings that didn't belong to my cattle or the local wildlife. The feeling of eyes on me when I was working alone in the far pastures, and Buck's behavior becoming increasingly alert and nervous when we rode near Devil's Canyon. At first, I attributed it to my imagination. Spending long days alone on a remote ranch can play tricks on your mind, and I figured the intensity of working on the altar had left me more sensitive to my surroundings than usual. But as the signs accumulated, I became convinced that someone or several someones was keeping me under surveillance. The tracks were the most concrete evidence. I found them in the soft dirt around my water tanks, near the barn, and along the fence lines that bordered the more remote sections of the ranch. They were human footprints, made by someone wearing soft-soled shoes or moccasins, and they appeared overnight, as if whoever was making them moved only in darkness. The prints were distinctive, smaller than my size 11 boots, with a gait that suggested someone who moved quietly and deliberately across the landscape. More intriguingly, the tracks often appeared in places that would have required considerable skill to reach without being seen. Whoever was watching me knew how to move through this terrain like a ghost. Buck's behavior was equally telling. My course had always been calm and steady, the kind of mount you could trust in any situation. But now he was constantly alert, his ears swiveling at sounds I couldn't hear, his nostrils flaring as he caught scents that meant nothing to me. When we rode near Devil's Canyon, he would sometimes stop and stare at the rim, as if he could see something up there that was invisible to my eyes. The feeling of being watched was harder to quantify, but impossible to ignore. It's a sensation. Any rancher knows the prickle on the back of your neck that tells you predators are near. The instinctive awareness that you're not alone, even when you can't see another living soul. But this was different from the usual vigilance required by ranch life. This felt personal, intentional, and strangely non-threatening. On the 4th day after completing the altar, I decided to test my suspicions. Instead of following my usual routine, I announced loudly to Buck that I was going to check the south pasture, then doubled back and positioned myself with binoculars on a ridge that gave me a clear view of Devil's Canyon. I didn't have to wait long. Within an hour, I saw movement on the canyon rim, 3 figures, moving with the fluid grace of people who had spent their lives in this landscape. They were too far away for me to make out details, but their presence confirmed what I had suspected. I was indeed being watched, but rather than feeling threatened, I found myself oddly comforted by the knowledge. Whoever these people were, they had been observing me for days without making any hostile moves. If they had wanted to cause trouble, they'd had plenty of opportunities. Their surveillance felt more like ... evaluation. That evening, I made a decision. That would have seemed crazy to most people, but felt perfectly natural to me. I loaded my truck with supplies and drove out to Devil's Canyon. Instead of returning home, I set up a simple camp near the restored altar and settled in to wait. I built a small fire as the sun set. Not for warmth. The July evening was still hot, but as a signal. If someone was watching me, I wanted them to know that I was here, that I was waiting, and that I meant no harm. I sat by the fire as darkness fell, listening to the night sounds of the desert and watching the stars emerge in the clear sky above the canyon. Around midnight, I heard the soft sound of footsteps on stone. 3 figures emerged from the shadows at the edge of my firelight, moving with such quiet grace that they seemed to materialize from the darkness itself. They were Native Americans. That much was immediately clear. 2 men and 1 woman, all appearing to be in their 50s or 60s, dressed in a mixture of traditional and modern clothing. The older of the 2 men wore jeans and a cotton shirt, but also a traditional headband and turquoise jewelry. The woman was dressed in a long skirt and blouse that looked handmade, with intricate beadwork that caught the firelight. The younger man wore modern clothes but carried himself with the bearing of someone deeply connected to traditional ways. For a long moment, we simply looked at each other across the fire. I remained seated, keeping my hands visible and my posture non-threatening. They stood at the edge of the light, studying me with eyes that seemed to see far more than just a middle-aged rancher sitting by a campfire. Finally, the older man spoke. His voice was deep and measured, with an accent that suggested English was not his first language. "You were the one who rebuilt the sacred place." It wasn't a question, so I simply nodded. "Yes, I found it damaged by the storms and felt it should be restored." The woman stepped forward slightly. "Why?" she asked. "This place means nothing to your people." I considered her question carefully before answering. "Maybe not to my people as a whole," I said, "but it means something to me. This land has been in my family for 4 generations. We've tried to be good stewards of it. When I found something sacred that was falling apart, it seemed wrong to let it continue to deteriorate." The younger man spoke for the first time. "You could have called the authorities, made it their problem." "I could have," I agreed. "But bureaucracy moved slowly, and the next storm might have destroyed what little remained. Besides, it felt like something I was meant to do." The 3 exchanged glances, communicating in a way that didn't require words. The older man moved closer to the fire and gestured toward the restored altar, which was barely visible in the darkness beyond our small circle of light. "Our grandfather's grandfather built that place," he said. "It was a site for ceremonies, for prayers, for connecting with the spirits of this land. When the white settlers came, our people were forced to leave. The sacred places were abandoned, forgotten." "Not forgotten," the woman corrected gently. "Hidden, waiting. We have been watching you," the older man continued. "Not just since you found the altar, but for years. Your family has treated this land with respect. You have not destroyed the old places or built where you should not build. You have been acceptable neighbors." I wasn't sure if that was a compliment or just a statement of fact, but I took it as a positive sign. When the storms revealed the altar, the woman said, "We thought the spirits were ready for it to be restored, but we wondered who would do the work. We watched to see if you would destroy it, ignore it, or ... She gestured toward the canyon. "Honor it." "You did more than honor it," the younger man added. "You had restored it exactly as it was meant to be. Stone by stone, you put it back together as if you could see the original design in your mind." The older man reached into a leather pouch at his side and pulled out something that glinted in the firelight. It was a small carved figure horse, made from what looked like turquoise and silver. "This belonged to the medicine man who built the altar," he said, holding the figure out toward me. "It has been in our family for 6 generations, waiting for the right time to return to the sacred place." I stared at the carved horse, understanding that I was being offered something of immense value and significance. "I can't accept that," I said. "It belongs to your family, to your people. It belongs to the altar," the woman said firmly. "And you are now the keeper of the altar. The spirits have chosen you for this role, whether you understand it or not." The older man placed the carved horse in my hands. It was warm to the touch and seemed to pulse with its own energy. "Tomorrow," he said, "we will bring you a gift, a living gift, to honor what you have done and to seal the bond between your family and this sacred place." Before I could ask what he meant, the 3 figures stepped back into the darkness and vanished as silently as they had appeared. I sat by the dying fire for another hour, holding the carved horse and trying to process what had just happened. The next morning, I drove home in a state of bewildered anticipation. I had been accepted by people whose ancestors had lived on this land for centuries before my family arrived. I had been entrusted with the care of a sacred site and given a precious artifact that connected me to generations of spiritual tradition, but I had no idea what the living gift might be, or what it would mean for my life on the ranch. I didn't have to wait long to find out. Around noon, as I was working on some fence repairs near the main ranch buildings, I heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching, but these weren't the familiar sounds of cattle or my own horses. These hoofbeats had a different rhythm, a different cadence that made me stop what I was doing and look toward the sound. What I saw took my breath away. Coming down the dirt road that led to my ranch was a procession, unlike anything I had ever witnessed. The same 3 people I had met the night before were riding horses, but they weren't alone. Behind them came at least 20 other riders, men and women of various ages, all mounted on beautiful horses and dressed in a mixture of traditional and modern clothing. But it was what they were leading that made me drop my tools and stare in amazement. At the center of the procession was a single horse, led by a rope halter but clearly not captive. It was a paint horse, black and white, with the kind of conformation that spoke of careful breeding and generations of selection for both beauty and ability. But there was something more than just physical perfection about this animal. It moved with a grace and presence that suggested intelligence and spirit far beyond the ordinary. The procession stopped in front of my house, and the older man I had met the night before dismounted and approached me. The rest of the riders remained mounted, forming a loose circle around the paint horse. "This is Windwalker," the man said, gesturing toward the paint. "He is descended from horses that our people have bred for over 200 years. His bloodline carries the spirit of the old ways, the connection between horse and rider that your people have forgotten." I walked slowly toward the horse, and he turned to look at me with eyes that seemed almost human in their intelligence. There was no fear in his gaze, no wildness or unpredictability. Instead, there was a calm assessment, as if he were taking my measure just as I was taking his. "He is our gift to you," the woman said, "in recognition of what you have done for the sacred place, and in hope that you will continue to be a guardian of the old ways." "I can't accept this," I protested. "He's too valuable, too important to your people." The younger man smiled for the first time since I had met him. "He is important to our people," he agreed. "That's why we're giving him to you. You have proven that you understand the sacred nature of this land. Windwalker will help you protect it." The older man handed me the lead rope. "He is not just a horse," he said. "He is a bridge between worlds, between the old ways and the new. Treat him with respect, and he will serve you faithfully. But remember, you are not his owner. You are his partner." As I took the rope, Windwalker stepped forward and gently touched my shoulder with his muzzle. It was a gesture of acceptance, of recognition, and in that moment I felt a connection form between us that went beyond anything I had ever experienced with an animal. The ceremony that followed was brief but profound. The riders formed a circle around Windwalker and me, and the older man spoke in a language I didn't understand, but that seemed to resonate in the very air around us. The woman scattered something that looked like cornmeal in the 4 directions, and the younger man offered a prayer in English that asked the spirits to bless the partnership between horse and rider. When it was over, the procession departed, as silently as it had arrived, leaving me standing in my ranch yard with the most magnificent horse I had ever seen. As I watched the riders disappear into the distance, I realized that my life had just changed in ways I was only beginning to understand. Windwalker and I stood together in the afternoon sun, two beings from different worlds learning to trust each other. The carved horse in my pocket seemed to pulse with warmth, and somewhere in the distance, I could swear I heard the whisper of ancient voices carried on the desert wind. The gift had been given, but the real journey was just beginning. In the weeks that followed Windwalker's arrival at the Morrison Ranch, I discovered that the magnificent paint horse was unlike any animal I had ever known. The connection I had felt during our first meeting deepened into something that challenged everything I thought I understood about the pack relationship between humans and horses. Windwalker didn't need to be broken or trained in the conventional sense. From the moment I first saddled him, it was clear that he understood not just what I wanted him to do, but why I wanted him to do it. He seemed to read my intentions before I fully formed them myself, responding to the slightest shift in my weight, or the most subtle change in my breathing. But it was more than just exceptional training or natural intelligence. Windwalker appeared to possess an almost supernatural awareness of the land around us. He could sense where the changes hours before they became apparent to me, find water sources in areas where I was certain none existed, and locate lost cattle with an accuracy that bordered on the mystical dot. Our first real test came during a severe thunderstorm that struck the ranch in late July. I had been out checking the herd when the weather turned violent with the sudden intensity that characterizes summer storms in the high desert. Lightning split the sky, thunder shook the ground, and rain fell in sheets that reduced visibility to mere yards. Buck, my old reliable horse, would have struggled to find his way home in such conditions, but Windwalker moved through the storm with absolute confidence, picking his way across terrain that had become treacherous with runoff and standing water. More remarkably, he seemed to know exactly where we needed to go to help the cattle that were in distress, without any guidance from me. Windwalker led us to a group of young calves that had become separated from their mothers and were huddled against a fence line, terrified by the lightning and thunder. Working together with an efficiency that amazed me, we guided the calves to safety, with Windwalker anticipating their movements and positioning himself exactly where he needed to, but to turn them in the right direction. As we worked, I began to understand what the older man had meant when he said that Windwalker was a bridge between worlds. This horse seemed to operate on a level of awareness that connected him not just to me, but to the land itself, to the cattle, to the very rhythms of nature that governed life in this harsh and beautiful place. The storm passed, but the experience left me profoundly changed. I had always been a competent horseman, but riding Windwalker was like discovering a new language, a form of communication that went far beyond the usual signals between rider and mount. We were becoming partners in the truest sense of the word. Word of Windwalker's extraordinary abilities began to spread through the ranching community. Other cattlemen who had heard about the Indian horse came to see for themselves, and many left shaking their heads in amazement. Some were skeptical, attributing his abilities to coincidence or my imagination, but those who saw him work came away convinced that they had witnessed something genuinely extraordinary. Tom Bradley, who ran the neighboring ranch to the south, was one of the skeptics until he saw Windwalker in action. Tom had lost a prize bull during a blizzard the previous winter and had given up hope of ever finding the animal. When I mentioned this to Windwalker during one of our rides, speaking to him, as I had begun to do regularly, the horse immediately changed direction and led us to a remote canyon where we found the bull, alive but trapped by fallen rocks. "That's impossible," Tom said as we worked to free his bull. "There's no way that horse could have known where to look. I've searched every inch of this area a dozen times, but the evidence was undeniable. Somehow, Windwalker had known exactly where to find the missing animal." Word of the rescue spread, and soon I was receiving calls from ranchers across the region, asking if Windwalker and I could help locate lost livestock. We never failed to find what we were looking for. The relationship between Windwalker and me continued to deepen throughout the summer and into the fall. I found myself spending more and more time at the restored altar in Devil's Canyon, often riding there in the early morning or late evening when the light was soft and the desert was at its most beautiful. Windwalker seemed to understand the significance of the place. When we arrived at the altar, he would stand quietly while I sat among the stones, sometimes for hours at a time. I wasn't praying in any conventional sense, but I was connecting with something larger than myself, something that had been awakened when I restored the sacred site. During these quiet moments, I began to understand that the gift of Windwalker was about more than just having an exceptional horse. It was about accepting a responsibility that went far beyond the boundaries of my ranch. I was being called to serve as a guardian not just of the altar, but of the entire landscape and the ancient wisdom it contained. This understanding was reinforced when the 3 Native Americans who had brought Windwalker returned in early September. I was sitting by the altar at sunset when they appeared, as silently as they had before, emerging from the shadows like spirits materializing from the desert itself. "You have learned to listen," the older man said, settling onto one of the stones near where I sat. "The horse has taught you to hear what the land is saying." "He's taught me a lot of things," I agreed, "but I'm still not sure I understand what you want from me." The woman smiled. "We don't want anything from you. The spirits want something from you. They want you to be a bridge, just as Windwalker is a bridge. A bridge between what? Between the old ways and the new," the younger man explained. "Between your people and our people. Between the wisdom of the past and the needs of the present." They went on to explain that the altar I had restored was one of several sacred sites scattered across the region, most of them forgotten or destroyed by development and neglect. My work had demonstrated that it was possible for someone from outside their culture to understand and respect the sacred nature of these places. "There are others," the older man said. "Other sites that need protection, other places where the spirits still dwell but the physical structures are failing. We are too few to restore them all ourselves, and the authorities, ... double quotes, he shrugged. They see only archaeological artifacts, not living sacred spaces. What are you asking me to do?" "We're asking you to help us preserve what remains," the woman said, "to use your knowledge of this land, your resources, and your understanding to protect the sacred places before they are lost forever." It was a daunting responsibility, but as I sat among the stones of the altar with Windwalker standing quietly nearby, I felt the rightness of it in my bones. This was why I had been led to discover the altar, why I had felt compelled to restore it, why I had been given the gift of an extraordinary horse who could help me navigate this landscape in ways I was only beginning to understand. "I'll do what I can," I said simply. Over the following months, my life took on a new dimension. In addition to running the ranch, I began working with my new Native American friends, whose names I learned were Joseph, Maria, and David, to identify and protect other sacred sites in the region. Windwalker and I would scout potential locations, often guided by nothing more than vague descriptions of landmarks and half-remembered stories passed down through generations. We found a medicine wheel on a remote mesa, its stone spokes scattered, but still recognizable to eyes that knew what to look for. We discovered the remains of a Vision Quest site in a hidden canyon, marked by carefully arranged stones and the remnants of ancient fire pits. We located a water shrine near a natural spring, its carved symbols worn by centuries of weather, but still clearly visible to those who understood their meaning. Each site we found was in various stages of decay, but each was also clearly sacred to the people who had created them. Working together, we began a careful process of restoration and preservation, always following traditional protocols, and always with the guidance of tribal elders who understood the spiritual significance of our work. The work was challenging, both physically and emotionally. Moving heavy stones in remote locations required careful planning and considerable effort. But the emotional challenge was even greater, learning to see the landscape through eyes that recognized the sacred in places where I had previously seen only rocks and dirt. Windwalker was essential to all of this work. His ability to navigate difficult terrain made it possible to reach sites that would have been inaccessible with ordinary horses. His uncanny awareness of his surroundings helped us locate hidden features that might otherwise have been overlooked, and his calm presence seemed to create a sense of reverence that made our work feel like worship rather than labor. But perhaps, most importantly, Windwalker served as a constant reminder that I was part of something larger than myself. When I was working with him, I felt connected not just to the horse, but to the land, to the people who had lived here before me, and to the spiritual forces that had guided them in their relationship with this place. As winter approached, I realized that the past year had transformed me in ways I was still discovering. I was no longer just a rancher trying to make a living from difficult land. I had become a guardian of sacred places, a bridge between cultures, and a partner in preserving ancient wisdom for future generations. The carved horse that Joseph had given me on that first night by the altar had become my constant companion, a reminder of the responsibility I had accepted and the trust that had been placed in me. I carried it in my pocket every day, and sometimes, when I was working at one of the sacred sites, I would take it out and hold it, feeling the connection it represented between past and present, between the spiritual and the physical, between the old ways and the new. On Christmas Eve, as I sat by the restored altar watching the sun set over the vast landscape of the high desert, I reflected on the extraordinary journey that had begun with a simple decision to restore a forgotten sacred place. That decision had brought me Windwalker, had connected me to a community I had never known existed, and had given my life a purpose I had never imagined. Windwalker stood beside me, his breath visible in the cold air, his presence as comforting and reassuring as it had been from the first day he arrived at the ranch. Together, we watched the stars emerge in the clear desert sky, and I felt a profound sense of gratitude for the gifts I had been given and the path I had been called to follow. The altar was no longer forgotten. The sacred places were being preserved, and a rancher who had thought he was simply caring for his cattle had discovered that he was actually caring for something much more precious, the spiritual heritage of the land itself. As I rode home through the starlit desert, with Windwalker's hoofbeats echoing off the canyon walls, I knew that this was just the beginning. There were more sites to find, more work to do, more bridges to build between the wisdom of the past and the needs of the present. But for now, it was enough to know that the forgotten had been remembered, the sacred had been honored, and the ancient bond between human and horse, between people and land, had been renewed for another generation. The end. Legal notice. This story is completely fictional and was created for entertainment purposes. Any resemblance to real persons, living or dead, or actual events is purely coincidental.